America. Last year, Spence wrote a book called Knocking the Hustle, and it's a well put together book, but I'm not going to review it here. I am, however, going to rehearse an important distinction he lays out between activism and organizing. Hit the beat. Spence does a good job laying out the distinction between activism and organizing, where activism is primarily concerned with speaking truth to power. Organizing is primarily concerned with growing the participants' capacity to govern. To be clear, there's a dignity in speaking truth to power, and since fear of white backlash is one of the most formidable obstacles keeping black people from governing and redressing justice claims, supporting habits of thought and action that go along with speaking truth to power is critical to achieving racial justice in America. However, speaking truth to power and all of the trappings of prophetic elitism that go into the cult of the activist leader is not the work of political organizing in a democracy, because political organizing in a democracy is primarily concerned with how to broaden the capacity to govern. That is, to exert political power and help people wield that power comfortably and responsibly. That's what organizing does. The best thing one of these activist, charismatic leaders can do is provide cover for others of the movement's participants to learn how to govern and build institutions wielding power responsibly. Well-organized movements broaden their participants' capacity to govern. It's not sexy, it's not efficient, it's not obvious. It is, however, a movement that's legitimized by promoting the goals of self-determination. We don't conventionally associate the work organizers do with governing because governing from the bottom looks different than governing from the top. If you're a working stiff or homeless and you're trying to get your government to work for you, you're doing it in the streets, you're doing it door to door, you're doing it by trying to get meetings. The deep problem in our political culture, even on the left, is that the guiding ideology holds that the charismatic leader, usually male and usually hyper-articulate, is the product of good politics, rather than understanding that the product of good politics is an institution that cultivates the capacity to govern, generally diffused among all of the participants. We think of the civil rights movement and we think of Martin Luther King, but we should think of Fannie Lou Hamer and Bayard Rustin, people doing the work of setting up institutions and organizing to fix and adjust institutions. The Montgomery bus boycott wasn't held together by King's speeches. It was a 388-day boycott where people still had to get to work. Rides had to be organized by people who did not have cars. The logistics of the boycott involved sustained and creative solutions and the energies, thoughts, and courage of a broad swath in order to run that campaign. The great shame is that we do not memorialize that quality of organizing in our media. We don't remind people that justice demands political organizing and the collegial vulnerabilities and relationships of trust that go into that quality of democratic governance. That's one reason we have to seize the media and get more stories about political organizing produced. Let me put a finer point on it. What I'm trying to do here with the Funky Academic is to increase our capacity to govern. If I'm doing my job, these videos should equip you to seize power in your social and political institutions and then transform those institutions into ones that promote justice through increasing all participants' capacity to redress their democratic government. That should be the test of every institution you're a part of. Does this school help me govern? Is this job growing my capacity to govern? Does this church grow my capacity to govern? I was lucky enough to be a part of a church in Chicago, University Church, that intentionally organized and put resources behind a campaign to win a level 1 trauma center on the south side of Chicago. The church didn't try to pass the hat and start its own hospital. That's not what the church did. That's not its job. The church congregation decided to make its mission to show that the Christian thing to do was to work with our neighbors and demand that the University of Chicago Hospital meet the needs of its community. That is a church that taught its congregation how to govern in line with Christian values. And that included getting in the streets and talking truth to power and making signs and phone calls and having input in meetings where decisions were made. All with an eye to strategizing how to get the local hospital to have a level 1 trauma center. If your institutions aren't increasing your capacity to govern, then maybe you need to work with others to strategize about how to either transform or seize power over that institution. To recap, activists are primarily concerned with speaking truth to power. Organizers are trying to grow their community's capacity to govern. The emphasis in activism is speech. The emphasis in organizing is strategizing to build institutions. The question you need to ask yourself is this institution helping me learn how to govern? That is, take up and wield power responsibly and strategically in a way that promotes institutions of freedom? If the answer is no, then you may need to figure out a way to work with others to seize power and transform that organization. Thank you for taking the time to watch this latest episode of The Funky Academic. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email. And if you like what you see, please find me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter. Thank you again and take care.